Hello there, welcome to Chess Logic. This is a game played between Magnus Carlsen and Cordts Ingo in the year 2000, and Carlsen is playing white in this game. And game begins with d4, and Ingo develops this knight into f6 and c4, followed by c5, and Carlsen supports his pawn with an f3 knight push, but Ingo captures anyway and knight recaptures. And now e5 is played, threatening the knight on d5, and knight runs away into b5. Not a very wise position to put the knight in, considering that knight would be vulnerable to threats like this right here anyway. And now d5 is played and Carlsen captures, and now bishop comes out into the c5, and now his bishop, Ingo's bishop, is in now an active position, and it is possibly threatening this kingside attack. And Carlsen brings his knight into c3 position, much safer position for the knight to be in, and now Ingo castles. Now if we take a look at the position here in this stage, Ingo's pieces are developed and center of his pieces are open because these two pawns here are gone, and his bishop is developed, his knight is developed, and Carlsen on the other hand has not developed his bishops or both of his knights, and he has not castled his king. So not a very good start for Carlsen. And now he opens up his e-pawn, making some room for the bishop to come out, and now Ingo pushes his pawn further into e4 square. Not a very good position for Carlsen. If you look at h3 is played, and now rook e8 is played. Now Carlsen pushes his g-pawn into 4 square. Not a very good option for Carlsen. I wonder what he was seeing in that move. This move actually turns out to be a pretty good vulnerability for Carlsen in the future game. Anyway, now rook comes down to e5 and attacks the pawn in d file. Carlsen simply develops his bishop onto c5. c4 square is obtained for the bishop, and his bishop is now developed. It's also protecting the pawn in d file. Now Ingo develops his knight into d7 square, and his knights are now connected. Carlsen develops his bishop. Carlsen moves his queen into b3 square, supporting his bishop and strengthening this file right here. This diagonal movement for the bishop and the queen. And now Ingo moves his knight down to e8, which looks like a pretty solid move because it is making room for this queen to come down to the square and possibly build an attack over this king side. Now if we take a look, Ingo has all his pieces developed and ready to attack. He has his rook over here, and he has his his queen ready to come to h4 square, and the pawn here is ready to support any pieces here, and it's preventing any pieces from occupying d3 or f3 squares, and it's supported by this rook. Black is in a very solid position, and now Carlsen tries to fend off the black pawn from there, trying to build an attack on that pawn by developing his knight into d2 square, but Ingo suddenly brings back the supporter for this pawn by developing his knight back into d6 square, and it's also attacking the bishop in this square, c4 square, probably looking for a trade-off if that's possible for Carlsen. But Carlsen is not ready for a trade-off at the moment. And he tucks his bishop into e2 square, which is not a wise decision because this bishop is not doing a lot here, and even if it comes down to e2 square, it cannot move into f3 or d3 squares, which is blocked by this pawn. So not a wise decision. And now Ingo finally brings his queen into h4 square and threatens an attack on the king. Carlsen is not bothered about that, and he's simply developing his knight into c4 square, and it's attacking the knight and the rook in e5 and d6 squares. So Ingo captures the knight, and Carlsen recaptures with his queen, and now b5 is pushed and queen is under attack. Queen moves, captures the pawn and threatens attack on this knight over here. And if we take a closer look at this move, we wonder why Ingo is sacrificing his pawn right here, and Carlsen happily takes that pawn. But later on we see that this file was being opened up by Ingo for an attack from this bishop on this file right here. Carlsen's queen is attacked by the rook in b5, and queen moves aside into a5 and still attacking the knight here on d7, so that the bishop is kind of married to this knight for its protection. So Ingo decides to move his knight into f6, and it frees the bishop in c8. Now the bishop is free to move, and Carlsen moves his queen into c6 square. It's now protecting the pawn, and it's also threatening the bishop in c5 square. So Ingo had to bring back his knight into d7 square to protect the bishop over here, and now Carlsen places his pawn in d6 square, which is also opening up this file over here, attacking this pawn. e4 pawn is very dangerous for Carlsen, as it's controlling these two squares, the f3 and d3. So Carlsen wants to trade off the pawn, capture the pawn with the knight, and if at all the rook recaptures, he wants to capture it back with the queen, so trying to overpower it there. But Ingo simply pushes his rook into e6 square, saying that you can go ahead and capture this pawn if you want, but I will recapture this pawn over here. And that's what we expect. And Carlsen captures the pawn over here, and instead of capturing this pawn with this bishop or rook, Ingo places his bishop in b7 square, which is a pretty good move because it's pinning the queen, the knight and the rook. The queen has to move, so the queen captures the knight and moves into d7 square, and now the bishop captures the knight in e4 square and threatens rook in h1, and rook moves up to h2, but it has not a lot of squares left to go for the rook, as we see in the next move. Bishop in c5 square comes into d6 square and attacks the rook again, and the rook has nowhere to go this time because h1 is still under control by this bishop in e4 square. So Carlsen pushes his bishop into c4 square, attacking the black rook in e6, and now Ingo simply brings his rook down to d8 from a8 square and attacks the queen in d7. The queen has to move. Queen moves to a7, and we see that both the rooks are still under attack by the bishop, and now Ingo goes ahead and captures the rook in h2, and Carlsen captures the rook in e6 square. You see that the black bishop is not under attack from any pieces, but the white bishop in e6 square is under attack by the pawn, and black recaptures, taking the bishop, and now all of a sudden white is down by 3 pawns and black is down by just 1 bishop. Now Carlsen places his queen on a6 square, attacking the pawn in e6 square and possibly trying to build an attack on the king. But Ingo had a better play and he moves his bishop into f3 square, a very dangerous move for white, because now the rook could come to d1 square any moment, and that's checkmate for white. So Carlsen couldn't allow that, so he blocks the path of the rook with a d2 bishop move, and the path of the rook is now blocked, even though the d1 square is blocked for the king to move and escape into this part. This temporarily prevents from checkmate. And now queen comes down to h3 and captures the pawn, and now Carlsen tries one last time to build a counter attack and takes the pawn on e6 and checks the king. Ingo simply tucks the king inside and saves it. And now Carlsen plays e7, threatens to capture the rook and checkmate, but Ingo supports the rook with the bishop into c7 position, and at this point there is not much white has left to do, and at this point Carlsen resigns the game. We can see what could have happened from this point on, which is of course the queen captures the rook in d8 and the bishop recaptures, after which white has not a lot of options except perhaps that one there, and after that the queen would simply come down here and that rook falls. This is pretty much game over for white. So anticipating these moves, Carlsen resigned at this point. The bishop c7 move was the last move played in the game. So I hope you guys have enjoyed the video.